Happy coding.
Hey there, this is Kevin here in our next video in our Intro to Web Dev series. And in this video, we're going to talk about CSS or cascading style sheets. So honestly, the best way I know how to do that is to just kind of dive right in. So that's what I'm going to do. So I am going to go to my NeoCities dashboard here. This is the website that we were using last week when we were learning about HTML. And I sort of have my index.html file here. I've sort of reverted it back to the default, and I've got the default files, and then I have my stuff that I did for week 2 in the week 2 directory. So I think what I'm going to do is create a new folder, actually, just to talk through the content that I want to talk through today. And I'm just going to call that something like, I don't know, Scratch. It's just like a Scratch directory that I'm going to put like temporary files in and likely delete them later. But I just want to have a place to work from. And then I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call this one, it doesn't really matter, but I'll call it index.html. And I'll hit create. And that has created an index.html file inside of my Scratch directory. So let me hit edit, and cool. I actually kind of forgot that it gave us default HTML, but that is cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some white space because I can't think without it. And I am going to just sort of talk through HTML in general. This is kind of a review from what we did. I'm also going to delete some of these lines because we're going to come back to them later. So I'm going to maybe make this a little bigger, and I'm going to type out a few HTML tags, and I'll say like H1. Maybe I'm going to pretend to make my website about bees. That's going to be my example, I think, this entire semester, so bear with me. Be with me? Sure, let's go with that. And I'm just going to say like, welcome to bees, my bees website. Sure. And I'll close my H1 tag, and I'll add a couple P tags maybe, like here are some facts about bees, and close that. P tag again. They can fly /P. Another P tag. They have 5 eyes. That's true, they do. And I'll have one more, maybe. They can sting. And this content doesn't really matter. I'm just adding some placeholder content, some HTML content to have something to work from. So I have an H1 tag and then 4 P tags that contain content. So let me zoom out and save that and then view that. And there we go. There is the output of my HTML. And the thing that I want to sort of highlight here is that HTML specifies the content. And maybe that sounds a little like sort of circular, but by that I mean when I look at this HTML, I can see that this is a heading and this is a paragraph. And if I had more tags, like if I had a UL or an image or an anchor tag, that those tags tell the browser what type of content it is, and the browser has some default styling rules for that content. So by default, an H1 element and a heading element is this big bold font. By default, a P tag gets like this font, and it's all sort of on a white background and with like black colors, and that's what it is. That's just the default styling, and that's fine, and it will work. But chances are, if you are navigating the modern web, you're not just looking at black text on a white background anymore. You are looking at styled content. And the way that we style content is with a different language, a different coding language called CSS, or cascading style sheets. And I'll talk about what that means as we go. But for now, I will get started with sort of like, I don't know, the most direct way to get to CSS, which is to add a style tag. Um, so the style tag is an HTML tag, and you can put it kind of anywhere. You can put it like at the bottom, you can put it in the middle of the body, but usually you tend to find it up here in the head section. So I'm going to create a style tag just like I would create any other HTML tag. So I'm going to have my opening angle bracket, the word style because that's the name of the tag, and then some white space, and then I'm going to close the tag before I forget. And now that I have this inside of this style tag, I can write CSS. I'm no longer writing HTML. I'm no longer adding content. I'm not adding other HTML tags. I am writing in a different coding language called CSS. And so that means that sort of similar to how different like human languages have different like letters and different rules, different coding languages have different syntax rules, which really means different symbols and rules about how those symbols get used. So let's say, for example, that I wanted my p tags to be a different color, just for now. The way I would do that is by adding what's called a CSS rule, which consists of a CSS selector and then some properties. And so what that looks like is I'm going to select the p tags on my page by just typing p in here. So there's no angle brackets, nothing like that. It's just p, and then oftentimes I'll put a space. The space is optional, but then you want a opening curly brace. This is not an angle brace. This is a curly brace, which on my laptop is shift, and then there's sort of a square bracket and curly bracket together. So shift and then that button gives me this like opening curly brace. And then often I will give myself more white space and I'll close that with a closing curly brace. In the same way that I have like my style tag, like opening and closing like that, I am opening and closing my my CSS rule here. So now I've selected the p tag, and now I want to add properties in here. And a property is like a name and then a value. So what did I say I wanted to change? The color. So if I want to change the color, I want to type color and then a colon, and then I often add a space and then the name of a color, and then a semicolon to tell the computer that this is the end of that particular style rule. Or style property inside of a rule. But anyway, so now that I have that, I'm going to save over here and I'm going to refresh the page over here. And sure enough, my p tags turned red, and there they are. And the reason for this is I have this CSS rule which selects every p tag and then specifies a property which has a property name of color and a property value of red. So there are many different properties that you can use, and a lot of this is just figuring out what the properties are and what types of values they will take. So for example, another property that I use all the time is the border property. And the border property, I think you actually can just specify a color. I'm pretty sure. Let's check. I could be wrong. So let me save this and refresh. And no, okay, you can't. Good. Maybe that's what I meant to show. And why doesn't that work? And it's because the border property takes a different kind of value. And in the case of a border needs to know more than just its color. It needs to know like the type of border that you want to show, because there's actually a bunch of options, and how big should the border be. So what I usually start with is I want a thin border, and I want a solid border. So I want a thin, solid blue border. And this is telling it how, uh, what the width of it should be, like how thick or thin should it be, and then the style of it. And I'll show you a different example in a second. But if I save this and refresh, then now my p tags have these beautiful blue borders. Um, okay, so I said I would show you a different style. Like, what does this thin and solid stuff mean? So I can put different values in here. So just like I can put different colors in. So let's say I want to change this to, I don't know, purple. And I want to change my border from being thin, maybe it'll be thick. And from solid, I want it to be dashed. So just different options. And I'll talk about how you figure out what those options are in a bit. But for now, I'm just going to try something else out. And I want to save and I'm going to refresh. And ugh, this looks horrifying. But now they are thicker and sort of dotted or dashed. Okay, so that is writing a selector for a element and then adding some style rules. And I'll keep it like that for now, I guess. And what I want to show next is that you can select like different elements. And so I also have an H1 tag here. So let's see, right now it's just kind of this big, boring kind of default styling. And let's say I wanted to make that, I don't know, I'll stick with color for now. Well, what I would do is inside of my style tag, I would select the H1 element by saying H1 and then a space and then an opening curly brace, and then I give myself some white space and I close my curly brace. And in here, I'll stick with color for now. I'll say color should be, I don't know, maybe I'll change this to red. And I'm going to save this and then refresh. And sure enough, now my H1 element is indeed red because I am selecting it with the H1 element selector and then giving it a property with a name of color and a value of red. And I can do the same thing with border or, you know, really any style property like that. But I'll sort of keep coming back to that. But for now, I want to move on to other types of selectors. So right now, what I have selected is every p tag and every h1 tag. So my first p tag has a style with a purple color and a blue sort of very thick, very distracting border. And my second p tag has that same style. My third p tag has that same style. So what if I didn't want them all to have the same style? Maybe I wanted two of them to have a different style and then the third one to have like, you know, yet a different style. So first off, it's driving me nuts that they're that distracting. So let me get rid of their border and I will say, sure, the color purple is fine. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just get rid of all of it. Sure. Um, so maybe I'll get rid of all that too. Yeah, why not? So I'm going to save that and refresh, and now it should go back to sort of default, just because the other way was very distracting to me. So what we just saw was element selectors, where you select all of the elements of a particular type. A different way to do it is to select a sort of subset of all of them, and you do that with a class selector. So to start with, maybe I'll add a couple classes down here, and I'll say, I'm going to add a class here by saying inside of this p tag, this opening p tag, like inside of the actual angle brackets, I'm going to add a class attribute. And you have probably seen attributes before. So if you created like an anchor tag with the A, then you had to add an href attribute, or if you messed with an image tag, then you had to add a source attribute. And those are just other sort of values that show up inside of an HTML tag. And in this case, I want to add a class. So I'm going to say class equals, and then a quotation mark, and I have to give it a name. This can be anything I want. I can call this like Kevin if I really wanted to. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'll say like maybe two of these facts about bees are interesting. Maybe one of them feels scary. So, and then I'll apply different styles to those. So in here, I'll say like interesting. And here I will also say class equals interesting. And by default, nothing will change. So I'm going to save this and refresh, and nothing should change. They can fly. They have 5 eyes. I don't know. Maybe 5 eyes are scary. Maybe. I don't know. But I've added an attribute, but I haven't actually used it yet in my CSS. So I'm going to use it over here. And I'm going to say use a class selector, which is a little different than an element selector. With an element selector, I was just using the name of the element. But with a class selector, I have to use a dot first. So I'm using dot, and then I'm saying the name of the class that I used, interesting, and then curly braces, and then some white space, and then I'll close that curly brace. And in here, I can add style properties. And so maybe here I'll say, maybe I should have come up with better examples. Maybe I'll add like a background color of yellow. That's a bee like color. Sure, I feel like that should be yellow there, but whatever. That's just syntax highlighting. So I'm going to save this. And what I expect is they can fly and they have 5 eyes to have a background color of yellow. And let's see. And it does. So they can fly, they have 5 eyes, both have yellow backgrounds now, but the other p tags are unaffected because they don't have that class. And so I could add maybe a different class, but actually maybe what I'll do is I will say that you can have different classes all over the place. And let's say I wanted to style this one like by itself. I wanted this one to be the only one that had a different color or a different style. And so I could use another class here, actually. So maybe that's what I'll start with. Sure, I'll start with this. And so I could say like class equals, I don't know, scary. And I could go up here and create a scary selector. So it's a class selector. So I'm going to say dot scary. And then curly braces, close my curly brace. And in here, maybe I'll say a background color of red. And then I'll think about what I want or what I expect. So I expect these two to be yellow, and then this last one to have a background color of red. So let's see if that works. And it does. Cool. So with what we've seen so far, that is fine, actually. Even though I only am styling one of the p tags with a class of scary, it's actually fine. Nothing's really stopping you from doing that. I will just say that in a couple of weeks, we are going to get to a third language called JavaScript. And when we get there, there will be a new kind of selector, which will become really important. For now, this will work and it's kind of fine. But just to show you what that would look like, because this is the only element that I'm saying is scary, I can actually change this to ID or identifier. And then up here in my CSS, instead of a dot, I would use a pound symbol or a hash symbol, sort of looks like a hashtag. And this is saying, find the element with the ID of scary and color it with that background color. Again, for what we're doing right now, there isn't really a huge difference between class and ID, but the distinction really becomes important when we get to JavaScript. So I wanted to mention it because it will come back in a couple of weeks. So when I start talking about IDs in a couple of weeks, you can be like, oh wait, I kind of remember that from that video 2 weeks ago. But same effect here, where these two have one style, and then this third one has its own style. Okay, so to summarize what we've done so far, is we have started learning about CSS. So HTML is just content, and by default, the content is kind of boring and black on white and kind of a boring font, and that's fine. But if you wanted to style that, add colors, add fonts, add sort of alignment, then you're looking at using CSS or cascading style sheets. And the sort of most direct way to do that is with a style tag, and then you use selectors. And we saw a few of those. There's element selectors where you just use the name of the element directly, and that's how you style every element that uses that tag. There's class selectors where you add a class attribute and then select it with a dot. And then there's ID selectors where you give it an ID attribute and then select it with the hash. So that is the nuts and bolts of CSS. And from here, it's in quotation marks, just a matter of figuring out what are the different things you can use as style properties inside of your style rules. And I talked about this sort of philosophically a bit in the last video, and that is I am not expecting you to memorize a bunch of these style properties. I am not expecting you to just be able to type a bunch of rules sort of out of thin air. Instead, what I'm trying to teach you is not directly web development. What I'm trying to teach you is how to teach yourself web development, because honestly, that's how it is. I don't have every CSS property memorized in my brain. What I do is I go and I look that up when I need it. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to, I don't know, center the text in my web page. And let's say I don't know how to do that off the top of my head. Well, what I would do is I would open up my favorite search engine and I would type in something like, I don't know, CSS center text, and I'd hit enter. Okay. And okay, now AI is everywhere. And sure, I mean, this is kind of right. Looks like there's a text align property that takes a value with maybe center. Or I could look at, here's W3 Schools. That's one of our good friends. Here's MDN, another great friend of ours. And this one gives you a couple of different options. So it looks like start is sort of to the left, end is to the right, center is well centered. Justify, ooh, justify is kind of like a book or a newspaper where they kind of stretch it out. That's kind of cool. I don't know if I've ever actually used that one. And then there's a bunch of other values down here, but it looks like I'm looking for text align center. So let me go back to my code editor and let's see, what do I want to do? I want to align, let's say all of it. So let's start with my H1, and I'll say like maybe I should name this because I keep doing it and I haven't talked about it. Like the order of your style rules, they do kind of matter, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But for what we're doing now, like I generally just put them in the order that they show up in the HTML. So like because my H1 tag is first, I'm going to put my H1 here, but it doesn't actually really matter for what we're doing. So I'm going to select my H1 and I'm going to open my curly brace, and then I'm going to close that. And then in here, I'm going to just write the name of the property that I just looked up, text align, and then a colon, and then a center, and then a semicolon. And let's save that and see what happens. Save and then refresh. And oh, I'm zoomed all the way in, right? So if I zoom out, that is actually centered. Welcome to my bees website. And my p tags are not yet centered. And so to do that, maybe I'll add another selector. And in this case, I'm going to use a p element selector. So p, and then curly braces, and then text align and center. And I'm going to get annoyed by this. That's one space. It doesn't really matter, but sure. Now that's a tab. Ugh. whatever. I'm not going to worry about it. So I'm going to save and go over here and refresh. And there we go. Now all of my text um, is center aligned because I have used the selectors for each of those elements, and we are looking good. Let's see. So I have a couple of other things to chat through. I'm doing okay on time. So what we've looked at so far is this style tag. And there are actually a couple of other ways to style your elements. And one of them is sort of like, I don't recommend doing this way, but like I do it all the time. So I'm not gonna like yell at you if you do it this way, but it's kind of not really recommended except for like really specific cases. And then the other way is it actually is the recommended way, like even better than this style tag here. So I'll show you those because you will likely see both of them as you like look at other tutorials and look at like MDN and W3 schools. So I'll show you what those look like. So the first one is what's called an inline style. And what that looks like is, well, it's a style attribute. So inside of a tag, you can add a style attribute and set it equal to something inside of two quotation marks. And in here, you put your style rules. So let's see, I want to say color. I'm running out of colors. So I'll say orange maybe, and then a semicolon. And I want to zoom out and save. Did that save? Sure. And then refresh. And yeah, okay. So my H1 turned orange up there. And that works. It gets a little annoying because you're mixing sort of style with content and you generally want to keep it kind of separate. So if you want to know like, oh, what is that H1? What is it styled as? Now I have to look in two different places. So usually you want to avoid this, but nothing is stopping you from doing it and you will see it out in the wild. So, I wanted to point it out. You can also specify multiple styles in here. So let's say I wanted to add a background color. Background dash color is black. Sure. And yeah, so I'll save that and I will go refresh over here. And there you go. Now my H1 is has a color of orange and a background color of black. I was sort of hesitating a second because I have a little thing over on my screen there, which is like the things I want to talk about. And I know I mentioned looking stuff up, but I feel like I didn't spend enough time on that. So I'll just say that like for any style guide, in fact, maybe what I want to look at is just something more general. So I'm kind of pulling out of what I was just talking about because I remembered I want to talk about a different thing. So this is inline styles and you'll see them. So that's a thing. But let me go back a little bit and say like, where am I getting all of these style rules from? And let's see. So if I type in like CSS properties, I'm going to find here's MDN and yeah, maybe. So yeah, here there's a bunch of values. They're kind of hidden over here in this left nav, which is kind of annoying, but here they are. Here's a bunch of different properties that you can use. So let's see, cursor is kind of a fun one. So this is a style where you can change what the mouse looks like. So let's see. So if I say cursor weight, it turns it. Can you see that? My mouse, yeah. So my mouse in here is now like whatever I give it. So crosshair is kind of cool. Like I can change the cursor using CSS. Some other things, let's see. So what's another interesting one? There's like width and height, but we'll talk about that sort of next week. But let's say like background stuff. So there's background color, and oh yeah, here it is. I was kind of looking for it, but it was hidden behind this like star thing. So there's a bunch of different background things. So you can just use background. You can use background color. That's what I was using. Background image. And let's say again that you were like, wait, where is he getting these properties? He keeps just kind of throwing them at us, and like, where did he get background color in the first place? Well, I sort of remember that because I use it all the time. But if you didn't, you could come to MDN or W3 schools and look at a bunch of different ways that you can specify it. So don't be afraid of looking stuff up. Or I could say like CSS background color, um, and I would get a bunch of results. So um, yeah, don't be afraid to look stuff up. And hopefully now I've like drilled the point home. All right, so bloop, 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 getting out of that rabbit hole. We just talked about inline styles, and those are okay. Maybe not like the most recommended thing, although again, I use them all the time and you'll see them in the wild. So, I'm not the cops. Do whatever feels right. Um, but the next thing I wanted to point out is like actually like the recommended way to add styles, and that is with something called an external style sheet, which is really like a separate file. Um, so right now I have my CSS in like kind of a couple places, but most importantly, I have it inside of this style tag. And again, it will work, but let's say I wanted to add like a second HTML file and I wanted some of the same rules. I would have to basically copy paste this into that second HTML file into its own style tag. And let's say I wanted to change a color on both pages. I would then have to update the styling on both pages, which would be kind of annoying, and then gets really annoying when you have like, dozens or hundreds of pages. So instead, what you can do is add a CSS file. So I'm going to go back to my directory here. And so far in this directory, I only have one file called index.html, and I'm going to create a new file. And I can name this file whatever I want. I can call it like my favorite file, whatever I want. I'm going to sort of follow a convention, and I'm going to call it style. You might call it styles, doesn't really matter, but I'm going to call it style. And then importantly, it's .css. So this is a CSS file. And I'm going to hit create. And there we go. Now I have a new CSS file, and I actually don't know if NeoCities is going to give us some default styling. Let's see. And if I hit edit, no. Okay, so it's this very empty file, scary black screen. But what I can do inside of this CSS file is add CSS. So I'm no longer writing HTML. I don't need a style tag in here. I can only write CSS in here, and it'll work when I connect it back to HTML. So just to get something started, maybe I will have, I don't know, maybe I will actually add a background color to the whole body. Maybe I'll try that. So I'm going to use a body element selector and some curly braces, and then I'm going to say background color of, I don't know, is light blue a color? Maybe, we'll find out. And sure, then I'll hit save. And now I will go back to my HTML file. So I'm going to edit my HTML file. So I'm sort of switching from my CSS file over to my HTML file. And I'm not going to get rid of this just yet. But if I go over here and I refresh my HTML, I won't see my blue background. And that's because I haven't actually hooked up my HTML file to my CSS file. And for that, I need a sort of magical line of code that I never remember off the top of my head. So I copied it earlier because I knew I would need it. And that is the link tag. And usually it shows up in the title tag, inside the title tag. So I'm going to add that here. I'm just going to paste the whole thing in because it's kind of long and annoying. So what I have here is link and then href and then the name of the file. And this is going to be similar to what we were doing with images last time. it's up to you, but if you have the slash, then you're at the top. You're no longer in the directory that you started in. So I deleted the slash, and then rel style sheet type blah blah blah. So I never remember this stuff. So I always just copy paste it. But now that I have that, what I'll do is I'll save, and maybe I'll just point out that it doesn't have a closing link tag. It's one of those weird like self-closing tags. This is just how it is. But now if I go over here and refresh, there's um, my light blue background. And the way this is working is my browser loads my HTML file, and as it's going, it goes through each tag and says like, okay, blah blah blah, do this. Okay, set the title of it to my page. In fact, maybe I'll say bees. Um, and then it gets here and it says, you have now pointed me to a style.css file, and you want it to be loaded as CSS. Cool. And it goes and reads that file, whatever's in there, and loads it as CSS. And so what I can do is I'm going to take this all out. So I'm going to just cut. I'm going to do Control X, just deleting it, and I'm going to save that. And now if I load it, my beautiful styling will be gone. And yeah, my blue background is still there because that's in my file, and my orange on black is still there because that's an inline style, but I've deleted my style tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit style.css to put those rules in there. I'm going to straighten that out. Yeah. Okay. So now if I save this file and now I refresh, I think my styles will come back. And they have. Cool. So that is external style sheets. I now have sort of separated my HTML from my CSS, and that's generally considered a good idea because now if I wanted to have a new web page called, I don't know, spiders, and I wanted to have sort of the same styling between them, so I wanted to have interesting and scary facts about spiders, I could by just loading this single line. And then let's say I wanted to change my styling and say, scary facts should not be red or not have a red background. They should actually have a red border. And I could do that by editing my single style.css file. So that is what external style sheets are. And that's generally what I would recommend using because you can now like sort of separate them in your brain, and it's a little easier to keep track of. Okay, so just a couple more things to chat through. One is, what does cascading style sheets mean? So style is maybe self-explanatory. Style is what it looks like. It's the styles of the content. Sheet, I don't actually know if there's a more formal definition, but I just think of it as a file. And so that only leaves cascading. What does cascading mean? And for that, let me look at what my example looks like so far. Yeah, okay. So I already have a couple examples of the cascading happening. So if I go into my CSS file, I have here, I have said that every p tag should be center aligned, and every element with a class of interesting should have a background color of yellow. And this is going to get really annoying because I'm going to have to go back and forth between these files. So let me go back to my HTML. But what I have here is a p element with a class of interesting. And so what's going to happen is the selector that is giving all of my p elements a center text align, that's going to stick. And then the interesting class that is giving it the yellow background, that's also going to stick, and they're going to combine. And that's why this p tag has both a center text align and a yellow background because those two style rules are cascading, sort of combining into the final result. Um, and this has some sort of interesting like ramifications that are like part of CSS. And that is what would happen if, for example, let's see, let me go back to my CSS. So I have this p tag that is interesting. So if I go back to my CSS, edit, and what would happen if I gave my p tag a background color of green? So now I have this style rule, this whole style rule selects every p tag, gives every p tag a background color of green. Then I select the p tags or every element with a class of interesting and I give it a background color of yellow. So for those p tags that are, well, p tags and interesting, what should their background color be? And there's no like right or wrong answer if you like haven't seen this before. There's not like, I'm not expecting you to know ahead of time, but it's sort of interesting. So I don't know. If this was a class, I would like call on you and be like, what do we think? I would take a vote or something. Um, since I'm not doing that, I will say like take a second and what do you think? I think there are some valid guesses. So you might say like maybe it would be an error message. Maybe they would be green. Maybe they would be yellow. Maybe they'd like weirdly combine and it's like both green and yellow. Um, Maybe it just kind of says like, oh, I don't know what to do, so it goes back to black. All of those are valid guesses, but let's just see what happens if I have I saved this, yeah, and I refresh. Um, what happens is okay, that was maybe a boring example. What happens is this one turned green because every p tag is green, um, but the interesting and scary ones they stayed yellow and red. Um, and that is because CSS, like the cascading part of CSS, follows a rule around specificity. And there's a bunch of different ways that that shows up, but for now, I will just say that element selectors are the least specific. So they will get sort of overwritten by class selectors because they're more specific, and they will get overwritten by ID selectors because they are like the most specific. There are actually other selectors out there, but for now, like that's kind of the general gist of it. Um, so again, this one is now green because if I go back to my HTML, that p tag does not have a class, so that gets the background color of the p selector, and then these have a more specific selector of class or ID, so those are staying with the selector with the style rules that those selectors are enabling. Okay, so then there's only two more things I want to talk through, and the first one is like common errors that you might encounter. I actually kind of forgot to do this last time, but there's a bunch of errors. There's a bunch of like different states that you might find yourself in that will cause you to like get frustrated or have to debug and kind of stare at it and bang your head against the wall for an hour. And I just want to sort of demonstrate what some of those might be. So let's see. So a really common one is going to be missing your curly braces. So if I forget to close a curly brace, first off, I get a little symbol over here, and it's kind of with this weird error message, expected colon at line 11, column 3. Really, it's just saying like something is weird here. But if I refresh over here, I actually don't know what will happen off the top of my head. So what have I done? I have an H1 that's not closed. Let's see. Yeah, what the heck? That's weird. Everything went away, and if I zoom out, yeah, okay. So everything else is just not styled at all. And that's because once it gets here, it's saying, okay, H1 is text align center. So that style is enabled. But then it kind of quits because we are now, I don't want to say like now we're coding because HTML is a programming language. No matter what anyone says, HTML, like the L in HTML stands for language. It is straight up a coding language. Um, However, HTML is really forgiving. So if you don't close a tag, like it might look weird, but your content will probably still be there. It might just be like kind of weird and um, like you might have headings all over the place, for example. But with CSS, and as we get to JavaScript, it'll be especially unforgiving. As soon as something weird happens, it just goes, well, I don't know what to do. Um, so you'll get into these kinds of cases where like half your page is unstyled because of something like this. Another thing that will very likely happen, and I actually don't know how this will work, but I needed something else. I don't know, this one. Let's see. So let's say I forgot my semicolons. I actually don't know what happens if I forget semicolons in CSS. So actually, let me go back and did I fix that first error? Yes, I did. Okay, so we're back to like the normal state, and I have a few things going on here. Um, but let's say I forget my semicolons at the end. This is like maybe the most common error in coding. Like every language is forgetting semicolons. But let's see what happens if I refresh. And yeah, again, we're sort of back to this weird thing where like some of the styles are working, but not others. And it's because these styles are not being applied. Like the rule itself is kind of okay, but the rules inside of them are broken because I don't have my curly braces. Um, so those are a couple of common errors. You will likely encounter them. You will likely encounter more, and that's okay. Again, like it doesn't mean you're like messing up or that you're not good at coding. It's a normal part of coding. I absolutely promise you. And if it happens, don't panic. Reach out. Look at the examples. Try to compare the symbols. Like really double check like every single symbol, or go to a search engine or an AI thing, I guess. Or reach out and I can help like squint at it with you. Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about is sort of your new best friend in this class, and that is your browser's developer tools. And we will come back to these over and over and over again. But I want to talk about them real quick because they will come in handy during this week. So how you get to your browser tools kind of depends on what browser you're using. I am in Firefox here. So the way I do it is I right click, and let me make sure you can see when I right click. You can. And then so I'm going to right click kind of anywhere in the page. In this case, I'm going to right click, I don't know, I'll right click the red paragraph here. So I'm going to hit right click and I'm going to hit inspect, and it pops open this like thing on the right side, this panel on the right side. And can I make this bigger? Ooh, I can. And it's showing me the HTML that generated this page, and that includes things like the attributes, the class and ID, and then over. Oh, my head's going to get in the way. Let me let me move my head. Yeah, we're gonna. That's the wrong thing. All right, we're gonna move my head. Woo! All right, I'm over here now. Sure. Um, but anyways, showing me the HTML up here, and then it's also showing me the CSS here. Um, and there's a bunch of other stuff that we'll get to like in later weeks. But the reason this is useful is you can get a sense of like why certain things are happening. So I right clicked this red p tag here, and so that's what it's showing. It's saying um, for p tags, for p selectors here, the rule text align center is enabled, so cool. But the background color green style property is sort of disabled. And can I mouse over here for why? Oh, it just gives me more options. But if I go up a level, it says for IDs of scary, they are background color of red, so that's sort of overriding. It's that sort of cascading effect. Um, I can also sort of add temporary styles here. So let's say element, I don't know, this is basically the equivalent of an inline style. Let's say I wanted, I don't know, I'm running out of ideas, like border, thin, solid, and uh, black. That'll show up okay. And there it is. And I will say that like this is not permanent, so this is not saved in your NeoCities editor at all. Um, but it does let you sort of play really quickly with different things and sort of understand like where's that style coming from. But if I refresh, it's gone, so you're not going to hurt anything by messing it up. But if you do want to save what you're doing over here, then make sure that you copy it over. So I showed you that in Firefox because that's my browser, but every browser has these developer tools. And so what I'll say is if you don't have that menu, you might have to enable it, or you might have to like go to it a slightly different way. So for example, in Firefox, I can also go to more tools and then web developer tools. And that's another way to pop it up. But I don't know, let's say you're in Safari. So I don't know anything about Safari, but I'll say like Safari um, inspect element. And yeah, here's some documentation from Apple. Um, and looks like, yeah, you have to first enable it by going to settings, Safari advanced, and toggling on web inspector. So, once you do that, you'll have access to the inspect menu or the developer tools. They're kind of the same thing. Um, and what I'll say is you can do that on any website. So I don't know, I'm going to pull up a different website. I'm going to say cats on Wikipedia. And sure. And this is not my website. I don't own Wikipedia, but I can right click and inspect. Right click, inspect. And here is the HTML that was written to create Wikipedia. I will maybe say that like this HTML is really involved, and it was likely written in probably like a templating language or something that was then converted to this HTML. But the idea is the same. At the end of the day, your browser sees HTML, and so you can see that these are HTML tags, and they have like here's an inline style. Here's some attributes. Let's see, do we have like a class anywhere? Yeah, here's an anchor tag. I can't zoom in that way, but here it is, an anchor tag with a class of MW redirect. And if I click on that, I can see down here, here's all the styles for it. And so you can get a sense of how things are done on other websites. And this is, fine. This is not like, you're not doing anything bad. This is not like hacking Wikipedia or anything. You're just understanding what HTML your computer is using to create this final web page. I will just point out like a kind of a fun thing, which is you can use this to kind of mess with stuff. Again, it's not breaking anything, but let's say I wanted to mess with this. I'll say like I'll just double click in here and I'll say it's kind of annoying because it's formatted weird. So maybe I'll edit as HTML. Sure. So I'm just going to replace all that with the cat is the best animal on the planet. And I'll hit enter or control enter. And yeah, so there we go. Over there, I've messed with the content of the page. And now, I don't know, you can do fun stuff like take a screenshot and send it to your friends or whatever, saying like, look at this Wikipedia page. It says this. But it's only on your computer. Like it's not, you didn't change Wikipedia for everybody. And as soon as you refresh, it goes away. But your browser's developer tools are really powerful because they let you sort of see behind the curtain and understand the code that goes into your browser. And we will come back to those over and over again as we get into the next few weeks. But for now, what we learned is about CSS. And again, CSS is how you style your HTML content, and you do that by adding either class or ID attributes to your elements, and then over in your CSS, you select a combination of elements, classes, and IDs to add style properties to those elements. And if you don't know what style properties are available, you can look them up on W3 Schools, on MDN, on those kinds of websites. And by figuring out what is the name of the property and what types of values does that property take, you can do many, many, many things. So that is CSS. All right, I will leave it there. I will say in our next video, what we'll learn about, or next week actually, what we'll learn about is sort of layout. So what we've focused on right now is the kinds of styles that are like at the text level. So it's things like colors or backgrounds or fonts, which we didn't play with at all here, but you can look that up. If you want to get into like layouts where you want stuff to be like to the left and right of each other, we will learn about that next week. But for now, you can play around with adding a bunch of cool styles to your HTML. Sweet. All right. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And until then, happy coding in CSS.